Yo, Big D back with a UFC 288 preview. Before I bring in my UFC friend, please subscribe, like, and share the Spunky Spectrum Sports YouTube page. We're talking a little UFC today, so things could get a little interesting. Also, check out the Big D podcast for the audio listeners on Spotify and Apple. So, back to talk UFC 288 this weekend. Whether he's talking Detroit Lions NFL draft, Mason Miller baseball, or Cejudo Sterling, there's one guy I go for, and that's Billy Ward, Action Network, and Fantasy Labs.
Yeah, what's up, guys? Good to be here. I cover these other sports. I enjoy these other sports, but mixed martial arts and combat sports truly has my heart. So this is the stuff I look forward to. This is what I get excited about. I enjoy the other things, but it's work to an extent. I would do this for free. I would talk to anyone who's willing to listen to me talk about the UFC for as long as they're willing to listen. So very glad to be here, Dylan.
Yeah, and how about this? Seemingly after what 15 pay-per-view fights over the first third of the year, we have May is going to start off with a contest for the 135-pound belt between Sterling and Cejudo. So, be honest, I don't know what to expect from this fight because I feel like we're getting not necessarily the same fighter, but almost two similar fighters because I almost think both these guys should be in the WWE more than a UFC match.
I hear where you're coming from, and in broad strokes, you're 100% right that they both primarily grapplers. I would honestly say both have underrated striking, not because they would look that good in a kickboxing match, but because everyone is so worried about their grappling threats that it opens up a lot. I've been trying to reacquaint myself with Henry Cejudo, who we haven't seen fight in a little over 3 years, and he lands a lot of really interesting shots, but they all come off that little dip to set up a takedown. So, anyone who's wrestled or done any kind of combat sports, they call it changing levels, where you kind of drop your body as if you're going to shoot to the legs. And he uses that wonderfully to set up flying knees and big kicks and all kinds of big actions. I don't know that he would be able to set those up against someone who's not worried about the takedown, which is an intriguing factor here. But he does a really good job of mixing the martial arts. Obviously, he's an Olympic gold medalist. That's his A skill. That's what he's best at. But he's not super one-dimensional. And same thing with Sterling. Sterling is a massive 135 pounder, which I think helps him here against Cejudo, who, originally won the title at 125. Olympic gold medalist at like 122, I think the kilograms works out to. So I like that size and especially length advantage for Sterling. But you're right. What it's really going to come down to is who wins the grappling exchanges. There is no question Cejudo is the better pure wrestler. If they were wearing singlets and headgear, this would be Cejudo 100%. But they're not, right? This is a mixed martial arts fight. Cejudo's submissions aren't anything special. Like, he's competent there, but, nothing crazy. And Sterling is just, they call him the funk master. He's just so weird. He grapples in unexpected ways. The thing that I really want to see here is if they get into a grappling exchange and Cejudo gets a little uncomfortable and he wants to stand up, is he going to do what wrestlers always do, which is expose their backs to try to work up from a turtle? That's historically what wrestlers do when they want to get up. But that's really scary against Aljamain Sterling, whose best skill or, best thing he does is he takes your back and he wears, make you carry him around like a backpack. He's had a lot of success against guys with that traditional wrestling background doing that. But Cejudo is smart. He always comes in with good game plans. Is he going to try to work more jiu-jitsu style get-ups where he walks his back along the fence or, pushes the guy off him? I don't know. And then, of course, he's been out of the game for 3 years. Is there ring rust? He's 36. These lighter weight classes, it's hard to age gracefully in them. So there's a lot of unknowns here. I'm leaning the Cejudo or the Sterling side for both DraftKings, daily fantasy as well as betting. This one's really interesting. For the first time that I have ever seen, they are both priced at exactly 8,100. Normally we see, even if it's money.
I don't think I've ever seen that. Both championship fighters are the exact same price.
Right. And normally we see, even if a fight is a dead pick 'em minus 110 both ways, they pick one guy almost at random to make 8,200. I really like that this time. Obviously, that $100 doesn't fundamentally change much. And the lines bounced around a little bit. I think Cejudo is a slight favorite on DraftKings, but it's, different sports books might have Sterling minus 115 instead. Obviously, for cash games, we're going to jam both of them in, right? Like, this is a no-brainer. Lighter weight classes, lower odds of finishes. There's probably going to be a ton of takedowns on both sides. I think Sterling will get credited for takedowns on a couple of occasions where Cejudo pops right back up, and he doesn't really score a takedown, but by DraftKings standards, he does. And then a lot of volume from striking. Jam them both in, but for GPPs, this is going to be a really interesting one. I'm leaning Sterling, but obviously want to have both guys.
Yeah, the last time we saw Sterling was against TJ Dillashaw, which really wasn't much of a fight because Dillashaw's shoulder popped out literally right at the start, but obviously Sterling did what he needed to do in that fight.
Yeah, it makes Sterling very hard to evaluate against championship level guys because he won the title with a disqualification in a fight he was clearly losing. Next fight, he rematches Petr Yan, wins it, but it was a split decision. It was pretty close. He deserved the win. I'm not saying he got lucky there, but it was one of those where he deserves the win because we judge things round by round. Where if you were evaluating the entire fight, you might say that Yan deserves it. And then his first title defense, or his first real title defense, is against TJ Dillashaw, who was just there for a paycheck with one arm. So hard to evaluate Sterling at a high level, but I really like the skills I've seen from him. Also hard to evaluate a 36-year-old who hasn't fought since before the pandemic. So very tough one. Definitely not one I'm going to try to pick a side on for cash games.
If you were going on from a betting side, who you lean more? Because obviously Cejudo, we know, Olympic wrestler, but Sterling's a younger, more used to fighting the UFC now. How do you see this fight going?
Yeah, I'm leaning Sterling's way. I do a piece every week for the Action Network called the Luck Ratings, where I try to look at, who's a little bit better, a little bit worse than their record suggests. To be honest, both these guys have gotten a little bit lucky. We got the split decision title defense against Yan, the DQ win against Yan for Sterling. Cejudo had a couple of real tight split decisions that both went his way in his run, where his losses were a bit more definitive. So it's hard from that standpoint. But the way I see it, this would be a really hard fight to handicap. If Cejudo hadn't taken 3 years off, we'd say, oh man, maybe that funky style from Sterling will get him. When you throw that in there, whatever percent chance you want to assign to it that he has a ton of ring rust and isn't quite himself, I think that's enough to make it betting on Sterling a value, especially if you're getting him as a slight underdog. But anything up to around even money, I'm going to take Sterling based on the ring rust and age factor. And I will say, being much, much bigger for the division, not just weight, but height and length.
Yeah, because Cejudo's like 5'4", Sterling's more like 5'8", so he's going to come into this fight as the much bigger 135-pounder.
And he's talking about he wants to beat Cejudo, beat O'Malley, and then go up to 45. But I think if you put him next to like Volkanovski or Yair Rodriguez or any of those 145ers, from a size perspective, I don't think you'd go, oh, Sterling shouldn't be in there with those guys. I think he'd look every bit as big. Maybe not Volkanovski. Volkanovski's massive. He's just really short. But the rest of the top 45ers, Sterling's just as big as those guys. Where Cejudo is, I think at his best 125er. Obviously harder to make weight at 36 than it was at 29 or whatever.
You can attest to that because
yeah, I originally was a 155-pound fighter in my late teens. That went south, made 170. Now I'm doing grappling tournaments at like 195, 200 and cutting weight for that. So,
well, unfortunately, we don't have the co-main event where both of us were signed to see Della Rouge and Oliveira, but we've got an intriguing and I would say critical co-main event, which could be for a potential welterweight title bout, whether it be later in this year or early next year.
yeah, I mean, don't get me started on the title implications. These guys are both clearly better than Colby Covington right now. Covington hasn't beat anyone in a long time, and he's coming off a year where he had to pretend to have a brain injury because of ongoing litigation. But be that as it may, hopefully these guys will, get enough of a check that they can afford to wait for the next shot at it. Yeah, Gilbert Burns and Belal Muhammad, two of my favorite welterweights. Burns, former 155er who came up, looked great at 170 most of the time, though. He's only lost at 170 to Kamaru Usman. No shame in that. And it was a close fight. And Hamzat Chimaev in a fight that a lot of people probably scored his way, despite being much smaller. Maybe the most not quite, one of the most decorated jiu-jitsu athletes in the UFC right now, multiple time world champion, but also has really good striking, incredible cardio. He always comes in just peak condition. And that's going to serve him well here because these guys took this fight on like 3 week notice. Burns was just coming off his win against Masvidal. And despite the short notice, they're making it a rare co-main event, not for a title, still 5 rounds. Really love that for Burns, just given his condition. But I like Belal Muhammad a lot too. You know, we had this kind of narrative about him. He's a boring wrestler. He's just going to shove you against the fence, slow things down. And he fought a guy with high level submission skills in Sean Brady and starched him, just absolutely put his lights out. So Belal Muhammad is a really scary guy with that dimension in his game. So I don't know too many welterweights that can take him down. You know, maybe Hamzat if it comes to that, or if they ever get to fight. But I don't really see Burns being able to initiate much offensive grappling here. So if Muhammad wants it to be a grappling match, he has that option. Burns, I think, kind of has to accept that he needs to beat him on his feet. Not to say he can't. I think he's the better technical striker, but that power from Muhammad was very impressive in his last fight. And again, this fight is the 8,000, 8,200 fight since it's got such close betting odds, which is probably why DraftKings did the 8,100 on both guys in the main event. But I think unless you have a very strong opinion on one of these, I think for cash games, playing all 4 of these guys is probably the way to go.
Yeah, do you worry especially for Burns, that this is the 3rd time he's fighting this year, because he fought in January, then beat Masvidal in Miami. So do you worry, especially with this being a 5-round fight, that Burns? I mean, yeah, we know Gilbert Burns is cardio second to no one, but do you worry about Gilbert Burns having the ability to bounce back 3 times in 12, 15 weeks?
I don't, but there's a big caveat to this. We don't know what these guys are like when they don't think they have a fight coming up. Some guys stay in the gym, 6 days a week, stay pretty close to peak condition, always ready to fight. Some guys are like, hey, I need a break. I need to rest and recover. I am pretty sure that Burns is in that former camp. He's just I just want to fight. I want to make my money. I want to always be in contention. I want to be top of mind if something happens to Colby so I can get a title fight, that kind of thing. So I think it actually benefits him because you don't have to get ready if you've been ready this whole time. With that said, if you take a lot of damage in one of those fights, taking the time off is probably better. But he didn't really against Neil Magny or Jorge Masvidal. Kind of cruised to victory in both of those fights. So that's a tough one. It's one of those, it's kind of like when a fighter misses weight where you're like, did he miss weight because he just didn't try that hard and it's going to be fresher? Or is it because he's out of shape? We don't really know. But I'm leaning towards this actually benefiting Burns, especially because it's a 5-round fight. And I'm getting a little deep on this one, so feel free to ignore the next like 5 sentences. But Belal Muhammad just had a month of Ramadan where he couldn't eat normally, couldn't drink water during the day. That's got to make this weight cut tough. It's got to put him in a little bit worse condition. I should say, although it probably doesn't need to be said, that Belal Muhammad is Muslim. for anyone who was wondering why I brought up Ramadan, that could be a factor. I mean, we don't know what his training was like during that month, how much he was getting after it, whether his recovery was messed up because he couldn't eat or drink during the day. All of that just gives me a little bit of a lean towards Gilbert Burns. And even if we didn't have any of those factors, I'd probably be slightly on his side anyway, but not confident enough to pick a side in cash games, certainly. I'm just going to play both of them. They're both cheap. For GPPs and, betting wise, that's where my lean on Burns comes in.
Yeah, I'm looking at the numbers right now, and Burns is a slight favorite, a little more than the Sterling Cejudo fight, but it's not really that much. I mean, Mose Muhammad is, I think, plus 110, and Gilbert Burns as much as 138 on 140 on a couple of sites I'm seeing. But I think playing both guys, especially when in this kind of a fight where you get that extra couple rounds, I think it's probably a good strategy. It's almost like we have the double title fights again, right?
I mean, we effectively do, right? It's 5 rounds, so there's no. I guess my only concern with that strategy here is these aren't guys who score a lot of like points per minute. They're both kind of dependent on the win bonus and stoppages to put up a big score. So don't go into this one thinking you're going to get 150 combined points, 180 combined points, anything crazy like that. It's not because I think the two of them are going to score a lot of points. It's because I'm not confident enough in one side or the other to risk not having the winner in my lineup. It does mean if we're playing all four of these guys, you kind of got to pick two winners with your other two spots in cash games. But given the salary you save on those four, should be able to do that.
I think both of the if you play all four fighters, that leaves you 32,400, which usually for a pay-per-view card would be a little maybe more iffy, but there aren't a lot of expensive fighters. I think there's $194 fighter, $190, $100 fighter.
True. I will say I would really love to find a way to play Movsar Evloev just because he was supposed to fight Bryce Mitchell. He was the same salary. Now he's fighting Diego Lopez, who's not only nowhere near as good as Bryce Mitchell, but also taking it on, 4 or 5 days notice. I want to play him and Dober. I'd really like to play both those guys. Can't really do that with the four that I just suggested, so you kind of have to pick a side on that. But you can definitely get two moderate, two somewhat heavy favorites or one massive favorite and one slight favorite if you play those four. So it's really just getting, if you play one of Dober or Mosvar, it's picking that sixth spot where things get a little sketchy here. But I think, we can find someone in that price range that makes it worthwhile.
Are you talking about most of Evov? Are you talking about the guy who got what, 9 takedowns in back-to-back fights?
Exactly. Yeah. So yes, he's going to get way more takedowns, which we really enjoy for DFS because both those went over 130. But Drew Dober is known for just putting people out right away. And he's fighting Matt Frivola, who just rushes forward and either dies or kills you. So it's scary not having either of them just because one of them could score 140 points and ruin your day. I think I'm definitely leaning Mosvar's side. Honestly, my big concern with him is he's fighting a guy who can't get back up because you can't get 9 takedowns on a guy if you hold him down the whole round. You can get at most 3.
Problem.
I mean, not a huge problem, of course, but it's not quite as comfortable. And he's 200 more, which limits you slightly more with that other favorite I'm talking about. But we'll see. I mean, it's an interesting card. I like to watch the line movement on some of these. If either of the title or if either of the 5-round fights, one of the guys ends up being a much more heavy favorite come Friday, I might just fade whoever that odd man out is, which gives you a little more flexibility.
Yeah, the one problem with Evilov is he was not really a knockout, not really a power puncher, more a wrestler, but I mean, you do trade the knockout chance for potentially a couple takedowns around.
Yeah, he has, I believe, 0 finishes in the UFC, but this is a real easy fight for a guy of his caliber, right? So, a lot of people aren't finishers until they fight someone well below their level, and then you tap them out pretty easily. But I've said it before, and I say it frequently in my DFS breakdown at FantasyLabs, that guys who are likely to get a quick submission aren't quite as valuable as the guys likely to get a knockdown or knockout, because a takedown is worth less points than a knockdown. And usually with a knockout, you get 10, 12, 15, however many follow-up shots, which runs up your score a little bit. Where with a submission, it's like takedown, work for position. You either get it or you don't. So you're not getting those bonus points along the way. And it's much easier to knock someone out in less than a minute than it is to take them down, pass their guard, get to a position you want, get them to expose an arm or a neck, and then get a submission. It's hard to do that in less than a minute. So that's the trade-off between Mosvar and Drew Dober. I think that's going to be a critical decision point if you're trying to play all 4 or 5-round fighters.
So, what fight are you looking forward to seeing besides the championship fights? But besides the co-main event, which fight are you looking forward to seeing? Or fighter?
I mean, Drew Dober versus Matt Frivola, we've talked about it a little bit here. It's going to be fun. I don't think it's going to be like a super technical fight where like, oh, wow, these guys are so skilled. Both these guys just kind of come out guns blazing. Matt Frivola gets hurt in every single fight, and then sometimes he pops back up and knocks you out, and sometimes he doesn't. Drew Dober, amazingly, I shocked myself looking at this, never been knocked out in the UFC, despite like coming very close on a couple of occasions. So that one's going to be fun from just like a pure violent slugfest standpoint. But personally, as the grappling nerd that I am, I'm looking forward to seeing the return of Kron Gracie. It's been a few years, he stayed active with grappling and all that kind of stuff. Jiu-jitsu has kind of lost its luster in high-level MMA recently, just because we've seen, the Dagestani wrestlers figure out how to beat it. And if you can't get a takedown, your jiu-jitsu is not really worth all that much. But Kron's kind of fun. Charles Jourdain might be a willing partner in terms of making this into a bit more of a grappling match. Not a ton of interest from a DFS or even betting standpoint, but just from a pure fan, I like jiu-jitsu. I like guys who can grapple. Anytime you see that Gracie name in there, you get a little excited.
Here's an interesting question I have. We've talked about title fights and some intriguing title fights. Obviously, you may have heard I think the title fight, the trilogy that was supposed to take place between Pena and Amanda Nunes has been postponed because Pena's been scrapped. So, what hypothetical title fight would you like to see next?
Oh man, there's like a dozen of them between men's lightweight and welterweight that I want to see, and it's making me sad because it doesn't seem like we're going to get either of them. But Dariush versus Islam would be awesome. Mateusz Gamrot versus Islam would be awesome. Even Arman Tsarukyan, who lost to Gamrot, but he really beat Gamrot if you actually watch that fight. Those are just three guys who are super high-level grapplers in a way that would be really fun to see if Islam can still bring them down. Because I think all those guys are better strikers than Makhachev. So it's kind of like, wow, can he take down this super athletic, high-level grappler? Those three are all on my list. And then at welterweight, Burns deserves a title fight. Muhammad deserves a title fight. Shavkat Rakhmonov, I think, would beat Leon Edwards right now. Hamzat at welterweight or Hamzat at middleweight now that it's back to Adesanya. That would be a really intriguing fight. So a lot of these guys who, in Hamzat's case, we don't know what weight class he is, but the other ones just, they keep getting blocked by the bigger names in front of them. Justin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, Colby Covington, who aren't quite as deserving in my book. So I'm just really waiting till we can pass the torch to this next generation in both of these divisions, because there's just so much talent coming up. I'm not confident that the best fighter in either of those divisions currently has the belt, and I'd really like to see if I'm right.
Well, you mentioned.
Oh wait, can I do one more? I'm sorry. You asked for one. I've given you like 7 already, but I've got one
Okay,
more.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Erin Blanchfield. She might be the best female grappler in the sport right now. Looked really good against was that Andrade she fought most recently? Looked really good against Andrade. Has beat everyone who puts in front of her. That division's kind of wide open now with Shevchenko losing. Just a huge fan, and Blanchfield's like 23 or something. So we haven't really had too many dominant long reigning champions, or the ones that we've had have all lost recently. And I think Blanchfield is in a very good spot to be the next one who holds it down for a long time.
Well, you mentioned all these lightweight, welterweight contenders. I'm going all the way to the top. I'm going to the top of the food chain. How about Sergey Pavlovich and John Jones? I know Pavlovich might need one or two more fights, but the way he took care of Curtis Blades was impressive. And and you imagine you get the best wrestler in the UFC against maybe one of the best UFC knockout artists. Ooh, I want to see that one.
Who are you referring to as the best wrestler in the UFC in this hypothetical?
Well, John Jones.
Stop it. No, not even close. No, that would be very exciting, but John Jones is never going to take that fight. Right? Like he doesn't, if he beats Stipe, he's holding out for Stipe, he's going to get his money, then he'll disappear until there's a better matchup for him, or maybe just retire. So no, yeah, great. I'd love to see that too. It'd be fun. Pavlovich actually has a Greco-Roman background, which a lot of people don't realize. I think he'd do really well against Jones because Jones doesn't shoot for takedowns. He clinches and trips and all the stuff that those Greco guys are good at. That's cool and all. It's not going to happen. So that was like if I would have said, Royce Gracie at his prime versus GSP or something. Like, yeah, that'd be awesome, but we're not going to see it. So why even mention it, Dylan? Why get the people excited?
I said hypothetical. I know John Bones Jones is not fighting Pavlovich because
If you're John Bones Jones, why would you fight Pavlovich? It's some guy not that many people have heard of. You're not going to make that much money, and he might just, destroy your perfect record in a very violent, painful way. I
So,
wouldn't do it if I'm Jones.
so wait a minute. So now you're thinking he's Floyd Money Mayweather all of a sudden?
I mean, do you think he came back for the love of the game?
No.
So Stipe is a bigger name and an easier fight. Like, I think it's probably Chael Sonnen, but I attribute every silly quote to Chael Sonnen, so grain of salt here. But he said the name of the game is getting the easiest fight for the most money. Like, that's at the end of the day what we're trying to do. And that is very much, 45-year-old fireman Stipe Miocic and not 31-year-old Ivan Drago looking Sergey Pavlovich at the peak of his power. So yeah, that's great. You said hypothetical. I thought you meant like, that we might see in a year. I didn't know you meant like in a magical fantasy land.
I mean, if we saw it, I mean, you imagine what that would be. I mean, we saw Jones and Alexander Gustafsson a few years ago, and Gustafsson gave Jones problems.
Yeah, but Gustafsson isn't some massive Russian 10 years younger than him. Like they were peers. I think Jones is a little bit younger. Like, feel free to save the clips of me making fun of you right now. So when they announce that fight, you can mock me mercilessly. But yeah, I just don't think there's much of a chance that we ever see anything like that. I think if he beats Miocic, the only way Jones would fight again is if they lure Nagano back to the division. That's my opinion. But
so then he fighting Nagano, basically a boxer.
Well, so yeah, because he'd fight Nagano because he has a much larger grappling advantage against Nagano. But honestly, I don't even think that's why. I think it's just because Nagano is a huge name and that would do a ton of sales, which is really, I think, the motivation for John Jones. It might sound like I'm being critical of Jones here when I say that stuff. I am not at all. Like, this is a very tough business. Make as much money as you can while you can, because they don't have pension plans. They don't have health care when you retire. Like, this is not at all me throwing shade at John Jones. I would do the exact same thing he's doing. I'd wait until the big money fights that I think I can win easily pop up. I'd take those and then I'd go about my merry way. So no shade at all. But come on. He's not going to do that.
That's why it's a hypothetical title fight and not.
I know, but there's degrees of hypothetical. There's hypothetical like, might really happen. The hypothetical fight I'd really like to see? Me versus any of these guys with pay-per-view points in my contract. That'd be my favorite. I'll go let any of these guys beat me up for, $500,000 or whatever I'd make on the back end. That's my favorite hypothetical if we're being real silly. Could I take Adesanya down once and maybe make it look interesting? I don't know. We're about the same size. I'm a strong dude. Sure. Yeah. I'm changing my answer. My answer is me versus Adesanya, assuming I get pay-per-view points on the back end of the deal and make like $1 million just to get my head kicked off.
You really would get paid $1 million and Israel Adesanya could take your head into next Tuesday, right?
You know how many times I've been knocked out for like $600 in a high school gym somewhere? Yeah, no, I'll take it. And I'm a pretty good grappler. I think I'm a little bit stronger than him. I'd have an outside shot of getting him down once before I get destroyed. I'm not saying I'd have any shot at winning, but could I take him down for a second before he pops up? Get you that 5 DraftKings points? I'm not attempting a strike, so don't worry about that. But
you will attempt that home ball, right?
Something heel hook. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe just squeeze his face as hard as I can and see if he taps. I don't know.
Okay. Thanks.
I know I really derailed this one, but yeah. Surprisingly fun card. Very fun DFS card with a real interesting decision point between the 4-5 round fighters and the 2 heavy favorites we're interested in. Can't play them all, so I'm actually really looking forward to this card because I really like these like game theory spots where we have to decide between things like that.
All right, Billy. Thanks for hopping on, and hopefully, UFC 288 is profitable for both of us.
Yeah, and if any middleweights drop off the card, Dana, call me. I can still get down on 185.